Hi, this is Alessio. Hope you're well, and welcome to a brand new update on the financial markets. In this particular video, we're going to take a look at some important charts on the financial markets and the stock markets and ask the question as to what could potentially happen as we head into the month of February. In fact, I want to show you some important dates in the month of February which could potentially have significance on the major markets. So as you may recall, in the previous video that I published, you may remember I mentioned that it's very likely that in the coming weeks, potentially in the month of February, we could see a major pullback, a drop in the stock market back down to the averages. Here's an important reason for this. Just recently, the stock market on this monthly chart, this is a monthly chart, the S&P, just recently we went into the red zone of the sigma, the danger zone, the extreme red zone you see here. The last time we did this was in January of 2018, as you can see here. And you can see what happened afterwards. After this peak into the red zone of the extreme sigma zone, we dropped back down into the blue zone, essentially a reversion to the mean. And I think it's quite likely as we head into the red zone of the sigma here, it is very likely on the balance of probabilities that in the coming weeks, we could see a similar drop down into the blue zone. By the way, I should mention that the red zone here of the sigma extends from current levels all the way up to about 3,450. 3,455. So what this chart shows to us is not that the stock market cannot go any higher, it can, but that the risk of a downside, of a risk of a pullback is much more probable. In other words, upside here is limited, but downside here, there's plenty of downside here for the stock market. So again, what this chart is showing to us is that the risk of downside or any pullback is now increasing. And I think in the coming weeks, we could see a potential pullback, whether from current levels or from slightly higher levels down to the 3,100 levels on the stock market in the blue zone. Now, the question is, what could potentially cause some kind of a reversion to the mean? What could produce a pullback here on the stock market? So let me, first of all, show you a couple of reasons. The first potential reason is this. You might have heard in the news there are some disturbing reports of a potential virus spreading from China. Now, there are also reports that this virus could be spreading to Europe and also America as well. Now, if you're thinking it's impossible for some kind of virus to bring down the stock market, let me just remind you what happened in 2014. In 2014, as you may remember, the fear of the Ebola virus potentially spreading to other parts of the world actually brought down the stock market at the time about 10%, a 10% drop in the stock market as we saw back in 2014. By the way, the stock market did eventually reverse direction as soon as we found that there was nothing much to worry about. In fact, the market rallied strongly higher. So again, we hope this is nothing serious, but if it does become something much more urgent, then we have to keep an eye on it on the stock market as well. The second important reason is this. Here's another reason why the market could drop in the month of February. Pay very close attention to these dates, February 3rd and February 11th. All right, guys, here's why. Because as I'm sure you probably know by now, we're heading into the election season in America. And here's why. Because in the first half of February, two key states in America, Iowa and New Hampshire, will decide on who they want to elect for their primaries. So as I'm sure you probably know by now, in November of this year, we're going to have the US presidential elections. The question is, who will be running against President Donald Trump in that election? So as you can see here, these are some of the candidates running for the Democratic Party. There is something you need to remember about the candidates who are running in the Democratic Party. They're essentially split into two factions or two groups. They are the populists that you can see here. The populists are Yang, Sanders, and Tulsi Gabbard. And then we have the establishment candidates, the centrists. And these are Klobuchar, Biden, and Buttigieg. By the way, in case you're wondering why I put Elizabeth Warren in the middle here, because Elizabeth Warren's strategy is to play to both the populist and the establishment. By the way, it is important to remember that when President Trump ran as a candidate in 2016, Donald Trump ran as a populist. He did not run as an establishment candidate. In fact, he ran against the establishment. And even today, President Trump is a populist. He is not an establishment centrist. By the way, guys, before I continue, I just want to mention this very quickly, which is I am not political. I don't take sides politically, left, right, Republican, or Democrat, whatever. And I want to be as impartial as possible when I do the analysis here. So at the moment, the people who are leading in the polls in both Iowa and New Hampshire appear to be Sanders and Biden. So we have one populist candidate and one establishment candidate. Now, in case you're wondering, what has this got to do with the stock market? I'll explain this in a few minutes. So for example, if you take a look at the recent polls from New Hampshire, You'll see that Bernie Sanders is leading here in New Hampshire. And I think in Iowa, he's tied. He's tied with Biden. So both Sanders and Biden appear to be leading in the polls in both states. Now, here's why this is important. You see, guys, at the moment, Wall Street expects Joe Biden, to win the primary elections. So in other words, guys, the favorite for Wall Street appears to be Joe Biden or one of the establishment candidates. Here's what I think Wall Street has got wrong. You see, in my opinion, Wall Street is making a big mistake here because I think they're underestimating the fact that it's possible for Bernie Sanders to actually win the Democratic primaries. In fact, I think it's much more likely for one of the populist candidates to win the primaries. By the way, in case any Bernie Sanders supporters are watching this video, let me make it very clear. This is not an attack on Bernie Sanders because it is no secret that corrupt and greedy Wall Street is deeply afraid of Bernie Sanders. And they should be afraid because for too long, Wall Street has continued its business, its corrupt and greedy activities without getting punished. And you might say, well, it's probably about time somebody shook up the system. As Donald Trump correctly said in 2016, it is time to drain the swamp. He was right. It is time to stop the corruption. And also, guys, let me mention this. It is not just Wall Street that is afraid of Bernie Sanders. The Democratic establishment and the mainstream media are also afraid of Bernie Sanders potentially winning the primaries and the presidential elections. In fact, let me play for you a very short clip here of Tucker Carlson of Fox News, who made this very same point. Listen to this.
The Democratic National Committee is worried about Bernie Sanders. All those attacks on Wall Street offend donors.
So guys, as you heard there, the Democratic establishment is deeply afraid of Bernie Sanders, as is Wall Street, and as is the mainstream media. So guys, pay very close attention to these dates. That's February 3rd and Tuesday, 11th of February. All right, guys, because these two particular elections, these two particular primaries, I should say, could have a major impact on the stock market. Now, I don't know who is going to win both primaries, but I think it's quite likely that one of these primaries is going to go to Bernie Sanders. It would not surprise me to see Bernie perhaps winning both of them. Maybe one of them might go to Yang or Biden. But again, it's quite likely that Bernie might win perhaps New Hampshire. So guys, keep a close eye on these two dates, February 3rd and February 11th, because I think it's quite likely we're going to see some volatility around those dates and then a potential pullback or a drop in the stock market as we see some profit taking place. Bye for now.